Hello, James DC Train Automation. Today we're going to be looking at solenoid point motors and switching. So YaMoRC have developed two different modules. One that does 4 solenoids and has 4 frog switch relays. So if you want to electro frog points and you want to switch the polarity of the frog as well as switch the point motor, you would use a YD8044. There's also a YD8008, which doesn't have the frog switch in, it just switches 8 solenoid point motors. So anything from PECO, Seep, that type of solenoid based point motor. The units have been developed with CDU power management internally in it. So what that means is, say you switching a route and you've got multiple points out of one unit on that route, the CDU always is looking that it's got enough power to switch all those points. So say you get halfway through switching 7 points out of the 8 unit output and there's not enough power left in the CDU, it doesn't forget you sent that command. So it will charge in milliseconds and then continue to switch that command for that point that it got to. With these units also, if you've got multiple ones on your layout, you have the ability to set when they start to turn on and charge the CDU power pack. So if you had 10 under the layout, you wouldn't want to turn the power supply on and they all suddenly are calling for current to charge the CDU up. So internally in the software, and we'll come across that in a minute, you can set the delay at which every module starts to charge. And then you won't have any inrush current or any excess draw on your power supply or your DCC track power, depending on how you wire the unit. So the units can be wired in 2 separate ways. You can have an external power supply, so this blue socket at the top here, which is AC or DC power. I would recommend using DC power. And also when you're using DC power, it wants to be a stable power supply. You probably won't see this on the camera, but on the label of this DC power supply there is a double square. It does highlight this. There's a double square. Read the instructions about this. What that means is it's double isolated. If you look at this power supply, the earth-in pin is plastic, so it's earth through. Some power supplies, you'll see this is actually metal, and sometimes the power supplies are connected via the positive pin to that earth-in pin. You do not want that. That will blow the electronics up. So that is very important, okay? But make sure double isolated or on DC power, or if it's AC power, you can use AC power in here as well. In the bottom here, this is where the DCC signal goes in. So in here is DCC signal input. If you've got a small layout and you're not too worried about the excess power you're using, you could loop the power from the signal into here. Because it can take AC current, it's capable of taking DCC track power. So that's how you can power it up. If you really want, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's something that if you've got the odd 1 or 2 of them, you could put 2 PECO point motors in one output. It is capable of switching the 2 together. I've tested it. It's not a problem at all. I wouldn't suggest every output of the unit you put them on, but just a couple, it's not going to be a problem at all. So that's the unit. How do we configure it? So in its basic form, if you've got any DCC system, you can put DCC track power in here, loop it into there. Then when you turn track power on, it's live, it's active, okay? It's already preset for solenoid point motors. So if you want to address the unit, you press the blue button here. The light comes on as active, waiting for accessory address to be sent to it. So say you sent it an address of 10 from your Z21 or your power cab, whatever it might be. It would then sequentially address the unit. So if it was the 4 output one, it'd be 10 to 13. If it was the 8 output one, it'd be 8 addresses, one after the other. So that's the basic way of using it, just for solenoid point motors. If we look at the computer now, I can show you the configuration of one of the units. To download the software, again, that's on YaMoRC's website. Go to the unit and you can download the firmware and the software for that unit. So that's YaMoRC.de. Once you've downloaded it, and you open up the configuration unit. This is what you can see here on the screen. we can update the firmware of these units. So all of these units, if we bring a new function in, they're all firmware updatable. So if we go to the ESLink program link, here we can see the firmware of that unit and the version it is and is available to load to it. There's a serial number for every unit as well. So, you know, this one's the one that's plugged in is 126. So if there's a problem with the batch, we can always find it, but hopefully we don't have that. So we've got connected up an 8 output one at the moment. So everything in here is talking about the 8 output device. So in here, we can set the addresses. Every output we can set to a different accessory address. So as you can see what I've got on the screen here, 100, then address 2, 60 and so on. If I wanted to put in 200 and then hit auto, it automatically sequentially addresses it. If I then hit the tick button, it then will program the unit and all those addresses in one go. If I then change it to 1 and hit auto, it put it back to the defaults. Again, hit the tick and it also sets all those addresses. What you can also do with this unit, if you look to the right of the address, we have these ticks. Every one has just one output per solenoid. But what you could do is link the outputs. So one address, so say output 1, we wanted it to switch 2 as well. You could turn off address 2, solenoid 2, and have those output 1 and 2 switching on one address. So you can configure it to suit whatever you want to do. It's not a problem at all. Every time you could make a configuration change, you must hit the tick button to execute it. So that is the basics of how you set it up. We have one here set up with a DC power supply. It's only 1 point motor. You can also test it. So before you put your track power to the input, we can just as long as you've got DC power going into it to drive it, we can actually still switch the point motor and we can keep clicking it as much as we like, and it will just keep switching until the amount of times I clicked on it, and there you go, it stops. It happens. So as you can see, very simple, very easy to use, but these are specific for solenoid point motors. These will not drive lots of different types of devices. They're specifically for solenoid point motors. So if that's what you've got on your layout, with any DCC system, which is NMRA standards, these work. Okay, so also when you set these units up, if you have got lots of them, I'll just show you quickly how to do this, but you can set in signal input. There's this configuration window. CDU startup delay. This is a default setting, so after 2,500 milliseconds, it starts to charge the CDU in the unit. So if you've got lots of them, I would just split them by a couple of 100 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds per unit, and then you know you have a delay between them all as you turn the system on. It just gets rid of all short circuits or any potential to do that. So yeah, you can also export all the settings for the unit, so you can save these to your computer as well. And again, that is in this same window. So you can export them and import them. So if you've made a mistake or you want to go back to an earlier setting you've set, as long as you save it at that point, you can store them all on your OneDrive or whatever you use. So that's really useful as well. There is some other things built into this, scripting. So if you wanted a standalone event to happen, you could get this to automatically set a sequence of points from a push button using another product, which we'll talk about later. So you could create an event that was automatically activated within it. Not many people will probably use that, but it is there if you want it. But we'll talk about that later on. So I hope that was interesting. So that is the YD8044 and the YD8008. Hope you like that, and we'll speak to you soon.